Welcome ladies and gentlemen, this is Mon, and in this guide, I'll be going over the Corrosion shotgun build, which recently just got mega buffed. For those of you that were waiting, I'm sorry it took me a bit of time to do, but the wait is finally over, and the reason why it took me a bit more time than usual is because since this gun has so many different combinations of how you could build it, I went ahead and made a damage calculator specifically for this build and tested almost every combination you could do. However, I'm unfortunately not going to share all of the numbers since the document is a hot mess, and I'm not exactly proud that it is a hot mess. But if enough of you guys wish to have the damage calculator to, for instance, compare your mods, then do like this video and let me know in the comments down below. Now before going over the build, do let me know which build you'd like to see next. Now starting with the weapon features, 80% chance to trigger Power Surge with a hit, but will not inflict Power Surge status on deviants. Power Surge is one instance of status/elemental damage of 50% of your psi intensity. It is of shock element. By default it cannot crit, cannot strike weak spots, and will not decay with distance. Now coming back to the weapon features, I know it says will not inflict Power Surge on deviants, but it will also not apply to humanoid enemies. More on this, however, when I go over in the Suffix and Substats priority. When Power Surge is triggered, you gain 50% Power Surge crit damage for 6 seconds, which can stack up to 4 times for a total of a massive 200% Power Surge crit damage. Then lastly, Power Surge damage factor plus 15%. So from all of these weapon features, we should now know that the weapon is a crit hybrid weapon that deals bullet damage and elemental damage. So weapon stars and armor stars will both matter for this weapon. Moving on to the calibration, you have two options: heavy calibration and rapid shot style. If the enemy has a lot of HP and you use kukri, then you're gonna want to use heavy style calibration. But if you don't use kukri and you're killing the boss before you use up all your bullets in your mag, then rapid shot style will be the calibration that you're gonna want to use. As for your calibration substats, it's going to be preferably double crit damage because this gun already gets a lot of crit rate from other sources, and the crit damage gained from calibrations is a lot. Moving on to the accessories, for the muzzle I'm using the extended break for the very important accuracy so that you land all of your pellets. Then for tactics, same logic, we're going for even more accuracy. For the magazine, you're locked to the shotgun drum mag. Then moving on to the best ammo to use. The best ammo to use in silos are going to be suppression shotgun AP ammo or penetration shotgun AP ammo depending on the type of enemy in said silo. However, if you're not in a silo, then you're going to want to use either blasting shotgun AP ammo or just tungsten shotgun AP ammo. It'll depend on if you're close or far away from your enemy. If you're close, use the purple AP ammo, but if you're far away, then you're going to want to use blasting shotgun AP ammo. Albeit, I will say, blasting shotgun AP ammo is pretty costly. Moving on to the deviation, you have two options. You have Lone Wolf, which is going to increase your bullet damage by 43.2%, and you have the Mini Feaster, which can give you up to 80% status damage bonus. It gives 20 per tentacle summoned. Now from my test bench, in almost every case, you will end up dealing more damage if you are using Feaster than if you were using the Wolf. However, this is assuming that Lone Wolf is going to bite the enemy, and Feaster is already giving you 80% status damage from the start. So let me go over the caveats here. If the Wolf isn't going to bite the enemy that you're shooting at, then you're going to want to use the Mini Feaster, because obviously if the Wolf doesn't bite, it's not giving you the damage bonus. However, one bonus that the Wolf has over the Feaster is that it can take aggro for you and tank damage. So if you really need the extra aggro, then you should probably use the Wolf. But in silos, for instance, where the Wolf doesn't bite every enemy that you're shooting, if you have someone else to take aggro for you, then you're going to deal more damage with Feaster because Feaster gives status damage bonus, and that damage bonus is always applied when you're shooting at enemies. Moreover, if you are shooting from afar, then you should use the Mini Feaster since you're going to lose weapon damage from damage fall off, so the Wolf's bonus will not be significant anymore. So this, for instance, could be applied if you're fighting an Omen and you're just standing far away. Now to come back to the test results and just compare a little bit, if we assume that the Wolf is hitting the enemy, albeit here, let's just take the mixed crit plus melee for instance. Here, in both cases, whether you're using some food buffs or no food buffs, Wolf is dealing less damage than Feaster. So for instance, with no food buffs, if you use the Wolf, you are dealing 1,133,000 damage, whereas with the Feaster, you're dealing 1,230,000 damage. However, this doesn't take into account the Wolf's personal damage, which scales up depending on how many food buffs or how many buffs that you use. And so let's say you're not using any food buffs, the level 5 Wolf is going to deal around like 30,000 damage per bite. So over the course of a full mag, the Wolf has time to bite like 3 times. So sometimes you will, funnily enough, find more damage with the Wolf. So even if you're theoretically, your personal damage is lower with the Wolf than with the Feaster, if you add in the Wolf's personal damage, you're gonna end up doing more damage. And here, this is the setup with Kukri. Okay, I just went over, but this is a setup with the Kukri, and if you use the Kukri, around 50,000 damage per bite. So over the course of 19 bullets, it's dealing 150,000 damage itself, which here, if we just take these two numbers, your total damage with your Deviation is actually going to be more with the Wolf than with the Feaster. And of course, do remember here, with the Feaster, your damage it's already starting at 80% status damage bonus. But these are your two options, the Mini Feaster and the Lone Wolf. Now, if I wasn't clear enough on which deviation to use, here is a Corrosion deviation decision tree for you to choose. Moving on to your secondary and melee weapons. For your secondary weapon, you're going to want to use the Bingo or the Bullseye depending on which UI you're reading the name. And the reason for this is because we're going to want to use its Bullseye effect, which, by the way, is 8% vulnerability for 12 seconds by default. And now, with the Corrosion, because of a certain mod that we will be running, we're not really going to care about the weak spot damage bonus that Bingo can give. So we're really just using this for the instant mark, because if you take a look at the second weapon feature, it says after switching weapons, the first hit is guaranteed to trigger the Bullseye. So essentially, let's say this is a boss, you just approach it, swap to Bingo, shoot once, marks it, and then you start DPSing with your Corrosion. Then moving on to the melee weapon that you're going to want to use with this build is going to be the Kukri. And the reason for this is because of both its weapon features. The first one makes it so that when you defeat a target, you'll gain 30% attack and 15% crit rate for 10 seconds, which are insane buffs because the attack will buff your weapon damage and the crit rate will buff both your weapon damage and your power surge damage. Or I should say, not directly a damage buff, but it'll increase your chances to land a crit hit, which in turn means more damage. Then, for the second weapon feature, it's when defeating an enemy with a heavy strike, you'll gain 20% psi intensity, and that's going to buff your power surge damage. So both these weapon features are insanely good for the Corrosion. However, you're going to need one more component to make the Kukri work, and that's going to be the Ice Pot. The reason for this is because the Ice Pot deviation will create sticky ice crystals for you to use. And essentially, what you do with these ice crystals is you just throw them on the ground, and then you do a heavy melee attack. So for me, I'm just going to have to hold my V key, just like this, and then my character destroys the ice cube, and you'll see that here, I get the attack buff, the crit rate buff, and the psi intensity buff. I know it's not written in this small box, but trust me, it is applied. Moving on to key gear, the key gear you're going to want to use is going to be the Gas Mask Hood. It gives 35% crit rate, which is exactly what Corrosion wants, since it's a crit weapon. Not just that, but it also gives 15% power surge damage as well, which will benefit Corrosion as well for its power surge damage. So pretty much Gas Mask Hood is literally made for the Corrosion. Now before talking about gear sets, I'd like to say that if you wish to see more Once Human guides or content, then make sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on the bell for notifications. Now for the gear sets, starting with the strongest one, this will be 3 Treacherous pieces with 2 Lone Wolf pieces. The 2 Lone Wolf pieces will give you a very important 5% crit rate, and also a 10% magazine capacity bonus, which will allow you to have your base mag cap go from 18 bullets to 19 bullets. Then, the 3 Treacherous pieces will give you a permanent 50% weapon and status damage bonus. So this is going to be insanely strong, however you have to be low HP and have low sanity. And ideally, you'd keep your sanity at 0%, which is represented by this gray bar, and 0% sanity means a max HP reduction of 60%. And how do you achieve this? Well, you're going to want to consume a plethora of food items that reduce your sanity. So you can do this by eating just spoiled food, which reduce your sanity by 200. You can also do this by eating the sanity corrosion capsules. But if you are a chef, I would recommend you to go into creative cooking, and in your creative cooking recipes, you're going to want to use just 1 normal water, so purified, it doesn't matter, and you're going to want to put in 5 dirty water. This will pretty much allow you to cook a certain type of water that will reduce your sanity level. And the more you craft them, the more it's going to reduce your sanity, and at some point you can make it so that 1 instance of large boiled water will reduce your sanity by 1000 points. Now, as for the less damage preset, but you'll have more survivability, this is going to be 3 Lone Wolf pieces and 2 Shelter pieces. The 2 Shelter pieces will give you 8% elemental damage bonus, which is pretty important since it's the stat that you have the least of. Then, as for the Lone Wolf pieces, we now get the 3 piece, which is stackable crit damage bonus, 60% per stack, stacking up to 8 times. Moving on to the mask hide, the best mask hide to use is going to be the Lucky Rabbit Fur for the 10% elemental damage bonus. Now here I do know that it says after scoring a crit, elemental damage plus 10%, but like I've demonstrated in pretty much my previous videos, it's not scoring a crit, it's just dealing any kind of damage. You will get the 10% elemental damage bonuses. Now for your Cradle perks, I'm currently in an endless stream server, so a non-novice scenario, so I'll go over those Cradle perks. You're going to want to use Anti-Void for the shotgun damage bonus and for the damage bonus against void anomalies. Then you'll want Tactical Combo for the weapon damage bonus after switching between weapons or reloading. You'll also want Status Enhancement for the 15% status damage bonus that you get after hitting a weak spot. And then you'll also want Elemental Sense and Transient Impact for the Power Surge damage bonuses. And lastly, you are left with 3 choices. You're going to want to go with Deviant Energy Defense for the Cradle Shield, and then you'll want Tactical Leap for the 20% damage bonus against any type of enemy in the game, and for the 10% damage bonus against their shields. Now here I know it does say damage against Deviants, but rest assured, I've demonstrated already in like all of my previous guides, this is actually damage against any type of enemy in the game. Just keep in mind that because it says against Deviants, it uses the same words that it says for suppression ammo. It'll only work in certain type of content, notably the silos. So if you're fighting enemies in the overworld, Tactical Leap will not work. Now lastly, you also have one last choice. Usually I would go with Marked Strike for the extra 20% weak spot damage bonus against enemies marked by Bullseye, or let's say Bounty Hunter for the stackable weapon damage bonus, which doesn't get removed after you switch weapons. But here I'm just going to go for Aerial Suppression for the extra damage reduction against any type of enemy in the game by 30%. And now once again, I know it does say only damage received from monsters minus 30%, but like I've demonstrated in all of my previous guides, this is actually damage reduction against any type of enemy in the game. Moving on to food buffs, if you're bossing, so if you're fighting enemies that spawn a big HP bar on your screen, you will want to use Mixed Fried Hot Dog as a priority if you're not Chef class for the damage bonus against marked enemies. Then if you are of Chef class, then you're going to also want to use Bone-In Deviated Sausage for the damage bonus against bosses. Both these multipliers count as damage against X type, which makes it the strongest multiplier since it applies to all your damage sources, and is generally a multiplier you don't have much of. However, if you are fighting Light Dreamers, you will then want to prioritize Mixed Fried Hot Dog if you're not Chef class, of course for the damage bonus against marked enemies. But if you are of Chef class, then you're going to want to eat Roulette Dumplings as your second food buff and try to roll for the damage plus 15% against elite enemies. It's literally the same story as the previous combo, but essentially, you're using Roulette Dumplings for the damage bonus against elite enemies instead of Bone-In, which is damage against bosses. The reason for this is Deep Dreamers aren't great ones, so they're not bosses, and they don't spawn a big HP bar on top of your screen, hence you will not gain anything from Bone-In Deviated Sausage if you fight Light Dreamers. Then for your drinks buff, you're going to want to prioritize Whimsical Drink for the status damage bonus, which will buff your Power Surge damage. And if you're a Chef, as your secondary drink buff, if you are in a scenario that has the Visional Wheel effect of Starfall Inversion, then you're going to want to use Sparkling Pumpkin Soup to increase your Power Surge damage by 10%, which, by the way, before, it used to count as a food buff, but now it counts as a hydration buff. And the reason why I say if you're in a Visional Wheel server, you'd use this is because if you're not in a Visional Wheel server, then you're going to want to use Stardust Energy Drink, to allow you to easily proc Tactical Leap, because in a server like Endless Dreams, like the server I'm in, where you can't proc Tactical Leaps effect easily with the Visional Wheel stuff, then you'll miss out on the Tactical Leaps effect, which is way more important than what Sparkling Soup can give to you. Moving on to the Suffix and Substats priority, starting with the Weapon mod and the Mask mod, the suffix that you're going to ideally go for is going to be Power Surge Suffix. And the reason for this is for the, well, insane substats. Pretty much you're going to look for Power Surge damage bonus, and then as for linked attribute, you're going to look for damage plus 8% on targets with Power Surge, shock damage bonus, and lastly, 1 damage bonus against X type of enemy. And the 3 gold substats that you're ideally going to look for is going to be X type, damage on targets with Power Surge, and shock damage bonus. Now, you might be wondering, why am I going for damage plus 8% on targets with Power Surge if Corrosion doesn't apply the Power Surge status? However, for PvP, it will apply the Power Surge status, albeit I guess it does match the weapons description where it says it only doesn't apply the Power Surge status on Deviants. And now with these stats, with only the Shield Cradle equipped, I'm sitting at 280% intensity, I have 2.4% Power Surge damage bonus, 3.6% damage against Great Ones, and 6.4% damage bonus against enemies with Power Surge. My Power Surge damage with all these stats taken into account should be 176. You'll see that it is exactly the amount of damage that I do. And with the same preset in silos without damage altering mutations, I still do the same damage. Not just that, but in Monolith, I am still doing the expected damage. Now, I do know I'm dealing 181 damage, but this is because this monster is a Great One, and the 3.6% damage against Great Ones is applied. Now, as for the other 2 Power Surge substats, we also have Power Surge crit damage and Power Surge trigger chance, but you have so much Power Surge crit damage that it's just less worth going for it. And as for trigger chance, you'll actually preferably want 1 mod with Power Surge trigger chance at 4.8%, so that once you fully stack your weapon mod's core effect, which I will reveal later, you will trigger Power Surge at 100% rate. So here, if I just show you a small demo, I'm going to trigger Power Surge, and you'll see that over a full mag of 30 bullets, I will not miss a single Power Surge proc. Then, for the helmet and the top mod, you're going to ideally go for a lunar mod, but of course if you can't, then for the top mod and the helmet mod, you're going to ideally go for a lunar mod with crit damage and weapon damage, with obviously of course 1 damage against X type of enemy. And if you don't have that, then obviously you're just going to have to go with a violent suffix mod. But I will say for lunar mods, even if you're not low HP, say you're at around 70% HP, you are still already gaining more value out of a lunar mod than from a violent suffix mod or talent suffix mods, depending on the substat on your lunar mod. And another thing is that if you don't have a good lunar mod with high weapon damage rolls, let's say you have gold crit damage, gold damage against X type, but not gold against weapon, albeit you do have one with the gold status, then you could definitively consider that. So if enough of you guys want to have the damage calculator, then you could definitely put that into the calculator with buffs and without buffs, and then judge for yourself if you're going to prefer the one with the status damage. Then for your pants mod and your boots mod, ideally you're going to go for downstar suffix with crit, with weapon, and with damage against X type. Of course, this also follows the same logic as with the lunar mods. If you don't have good substats levels with the crit plus weapon, but you do with crit plus status, then you can definitely consider that. And as well, if you don't have downstar suffix, then you're simply just going to go with violent suffix. The reason why we're going with downstar is their base value is pretty much the same as violent suffix or talent, depending on the substats line that you have on downstar, but there is possibility to gain more damage bonuses with them as long as you are at a higher height level than them. So here it says increased by up to X% against enemies standing at a lower level than yourself, and it maxes out at 5 meters. So for the crit damage substats line, for instance, if you are standing at a height of 5 meters more than your enemy, you're going to gain an extra 7.5% crit damage. Now lastly, there's also the gloves, and here ideally you will go with a violent suffix mod with weapon damage bonus as linked attribute. You could go for a secondary linked attribute with reload speed or magazine capacity, but always have one general attribute against X type of enemy, with that being focused. Now here, there are resonance mods that you could equip, but personally, spending time to farm a good resonance mod really isn't worth it. And not just that, you have to stack it up, and usually you'll kill enemies pretty easily without needing to stack these effects up. So currently, I wouldn't personally consider resonance mods. Moving on to your mods, starting with the weapons mod, the mod you're going to want to favor is going to be Shock Rampage. The core effect is inflicting power surge grants 5% power surge trigger chance based on weapons trigger chance for 5 seconds, stacking up to 4 stacks. Now, because it says based on weapons trigger chance, this means that this trigger chance is multiplicative with your weapons based trigger chance. So in total, once you've fully stacked this mod's effect, you will gain 96% power surge trigger chance in total. Like, this is what your power surge trigger chance is going to sit at. So you're pretty much almost always going to trigger it, unless, like, I guess the game's RNG is kind of funky, so you might still, like, have 2 to 3 no triggers per mag. But if you don't have a good shock rampage, or if you just straight up don't have it, then you could consider static shock, which is power surge status duration minus 50%, which doesn't matter that much, and power surge damage plus 20%. However, if both substats are at same level, so the same substats, same level with static shock and shock rampage, static shock is straight up just going to deal less damage compared to shock rampage. Then you're also not going to want to use surge amplifier, which is inflicting power surge grants power surge damage plus 5% for 3 seconds, up to 4 stacks. Corrosion doesn't inflict power surge status when you're in PvE, so straight up that's 0%. And even if you're not using corrosion, even if let's say the mod actually does work, since I didn't actually test this, it's still straight up worse since you have to first stack it, and it only stacks up to 3 stacks as of last time that I tried it on. So don't use surge amplifier. And of course, don't use shock diffusion. This mod just allows you to spread the power surge status, which doesn't do anything for corrosion. Then for your bingos mod, you're going to want to use vulnerability amplifier to increase your vulnerability by an extra 8%, so pretty much just more damage. As for the melee weapons mod, I'm using the kukri, but the melee weapons mod really doesn't matter since you're only using it to destroy the ice cubes. But I just put on melee amplifier just for the fun of it. Moving on to the helmet mod, the mod you're going to want to use is going to be Fateful Strike. This mod will remove all your weak spot damage multipliers. Don't get me wrong, you can still hit weak spot parts, and you should because of the status enhancement Cradle, which will still give you status damage upon hitting weak spots. But of course, you just won't have your weak spot damage multipliers, and this mod will also give you 10% crit rate and 30% crit damage. So this mod buffs both your damage sources and by a lot, so it's going to be really good. And here, you're not going to want to go with all the other options. And just to add some more explanations on a single mod, Deviation Expert, you're actually not going to want to use this because first, it only buffs your power surge damage, and it also only gives you a slight fire rate increase over your already slow fire rate, so it's not going to matter that much. And not just that, in my test benches, Deviation Expert just does worse. Then moving on to your mask mod, it's of course going to be the buff to first electrocution. It now gives you 35% power surge ultimate damage bonus, which is a separate damage multiplier from every other power surge damage bonuses in the game. So it's going to be really strong. Not just that, but this effect will now also not be affected by other players as of last patch. So if other players inflict power surge, you will not lose this mod's effect anymore. Moving on to the gloves mod, here you have 2 options. You essentially have crit amp and crit boost. And here the choice is mostly going to depend on whether you use kukri or not, and both their substats. So if you are using kukri, then you're going to find better results with crit amplifier, but if you don't use kukri, then you will find better results with crit boost. Obviously substats matter as well, so do keep that in mind if you do end up plugging values into the damage calculator. Then moving on to your boots mod, if you're on the low HP preset, then obviously you're going to want to use Rush Hour, since it'll permanently at least give you 24% weapon and 24% status damage bonus, and if you lose more HP, you can gain up to 36% weapon and status damage bonuses. So Rush Hour is going to be really strong. However, if you're not on the low HP preset, then you're going to want to use Covered Advance, since compared to all of the other remaining mods, it's either less conditional or straight up gives more buffs. Since its effect is taking no damage for only 4 seconds, will grant you 20% weapon and status damage bonus for 30 seconds. Moving on to your top mod, the ideal mod you're going to want to use is going to be Quick Comeback for its core effect, which is Well, it allows you to use healing shots, so activators, to reload. Moving on to the top mod, the ideal mod you're going to want to use is going to be Quick Comeback. The core effect is when using a healing shot, so an activator, it'll fully reload your entire mag, which will benefit your pants mod, which will be Deadshot, which is each crit hit by non-melee weapons grant plus 5% crit damage, stacking up to 40 times. And here it says the effect is removed upon the next reload. However, if you reload with Quick Comeback, it doesn't count as an actual reload for the Deadshot's effect, so you'll just keep the 45% crit damage bonus, which is going to be really great since that extra crit damage is going to instantly transfer to your next magazine. Albeit, of course, this is like the ideal situation if you don't often reload with activators, or let's say you just don't have good substats on Quick Comeback, then you could use ideally something else like Ardent Shield, which will make it so that once your shield's HP exceeds 1000, if anything deals more damage than the shield with a single instance of hit, it will not penetrate into your HP, so you won't lose any HP. So of course you can go use Ardent Shield or just any other mod that has the best substats on them. But that's going to be it for the top mod, and for the pants mod, like I said, it's going to be Deadshot for the stackable crit damage bonus, which is going to be really strong. This is it for this guide. If you wish to see more Once Human content, then do like this video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on the bell for future notifications. This is Mon, peace out.